Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Whiteboard. My name is Kaushal, and I'm the Director of Business Alliances at White Labs. We are a digital agency specializing in SaaS and e-commerce SEO. And I've got Dots with me. He's a strategy and marketing director at Content Allies, which helps B2B companies build revenue generating podcasts and marketing strategies and campaigns. So, Dots is also involved in tons of other things working in parallel. He runs his own marketing leadership podcast and is a co-founder of Listen Network that helps grow B2B podcast audience with highly targeted ad campaigns. A big welcome to you, Dots, and I'm so happy to host you today.
Thank you so much. It's really an honor having me on this podcast. I'm excited. Let's do it.
Brilliant. So, Dots, let's start with your journey, how you became the strategy and marketing director of Content Allies, and what really inspired you to enter this niche, focus on podcast marketing and strategy on Chicken.
Yeah, thank you. So I will split that into two stories. Let me say the first story about my journey. I have been in the marketing space for about 13 years now. I
Nice.
started in 2010 with my very first right out of Nigeria. I'm based in Canada right now. Right out of college and started to freelance until I got work and kept on going. And it was, as you probably know, as a marketer at that time, you just dipping your hands into different soups, if you put it that way. Whether it's social media, you are doing PPC, you are doing email, just bring the work, basically. And I did that for a couple of years. I worked a lot in the client, what we call the client side, the brand side, financial space, and then moved with my family to Canada, where we're based right now, and moved on to the agency side.
Okay.
That was where I started to, like, it's nice to create a niche for myself. And I've had both internal and external appraisals, and it's agreed. Everyone knows that strategy is what I do best.
Yeah.
So my full name is actually Oludotun. So the DOT there, adding the S. And then people will tell me you connect the dots with strategy, which is a tagline I always like to use. So that was how I got into that strategic role and strategic lane, working for smaller agencies out here in Canada, doing a lot of freelancing. I've been freelancing since 2016.
Yeah.
And that leads me to the second story with my involvement with Content Allies. Honestly, I think I can say this on camera. When they were hiring at that time, they were looking for a brand manager, like an account manager, like an account director. I came in from a strategic line. So I guess along the way, I got lucky and they felt maybe we might need a strategist more than an account director. And then I was hired. I'm sure they were, I will tell you today, I'm sure that there are a couple of other X factors involved. I think what I learned from that is that when you are trying to look for a job, always find as much as possible, always find the cultural that so I'm sure there must be something else that must have happened. But of course, it was a job I prepared to get and I got. But whilst getting into that, I realized the future of podcasting in general. Of course, we've always had podcasts. People like me were avid followers of the social media examiner podcast with since 2013. And then all these other podcasts that have popped up. But what started to really come, the last 2 years is that people are starting to see that podcasting is a much better way to consume content, is a much better way to consume knowledge. Even if it's a 1 hour podcast, like if you're going to transcribe a 1 hour podcast, it's almost like a pamphlet. It's almost like a book. Some people don't want to read books. I don't like reading books. I like hearing the books. So the stats are there, right? We are getting close to, if not already there, 100 million Americans listening to some podcast. Average podcast listen time between 1.2 and 2 hours a day. And all these other statistics, whether it's on the B2B side or the B2C side. I've been doing a lot of B2C marketing in the early times of my career. So working for a B2B podcast agency made sense because I needed to get that kind of experience well. So that was really how I got in there and how it's been a great experience, I tell you.
Yeah. Alright. And because with content analysis, it's basically helping B2B companies build the revenue engine through podcasts, right? Can you explain a bit of the key benefits of using podcast in B2B space and how exactly it can solve the ultimate goal of generating really high quality leads for you and your business?
Yeah, so very good question, I must say. So there is a term, very new term for you guys listening. It's called account-based podcasting. Actually, let me put it this way. The original term, if we call it the grandfather term, is account-based strategy. So basically, it's created more as a template to say account-based this, account-based that. So we have account-based sales, we have account-based marketing, we have account-based this and that. Now it's account-based podcasting. And what it simply means is running account-based marketing with podcasting as the excuse me, with podcasting as the engine, with podcasting as the revenue stream, if I will call it that. And we've seen, and I experience, we've seen people use this in a lot of ways, but the most common ways are this. People use this in a way to engage with prospects. So, for example, at the point of guest scheduling, you are looking for guests that might turn out to be your customers one day, and then you talk to them as interview. During interviews, you get to do back and forth, you get to do some prep calls each other. There's a bit of networking and relationship there. And if you do it right, you don't want to be very salesy at the very start. So the person will most likely even remember you afterwards and say, "Oh, I was on your podcast. I know you guys do this. Can we do something?" Right? And even in my podcast, I've closed maybe one or two people, right? So it's a bit like if you are very good, you can get up to 10% customer closure conversion rate from just getting podcasts who are like leads and speaking to them and then building that relationship from there. We've seen people also use this as a lead nurturing tool. So they've got existing leads and then they want to get them to go down the pipe, as we call it in B2B. So they interview them and they'll be like, "Oh, okay, I know I've been delaying you on this deal, on this contract. How about it's time to move it forward?" So we see people who do that. We also see people that take it even a step further. They interview customers. And people will be like, "They're already customers. Why should we interview them?" But the truth is that we are starting to get into a point in marketing whereby customers are becoming more educated and they can smell a rat from far away. So they want authenticity, right? So they want to see customer stories and things like that. And people talk about how the business has helped them. And that will even bring in more business to them. Because I say, and I saw your story out there. I like it. I would like to work with you. So it's slowly become a very powerful tool. And I think it's the future. If the smart speaker space matures properly, then it's going to even explode even more because people don't want to read right now. They want to watch, they want to listen.
Yep. I agree with you. Even and there's a reason for it. There's a scientific reason for it. People tend to consume video and audio content better than reading. Yeah, and you have put brilliantly all the use cases touching base multiple consumer journey. To be honest, and that's brilliant. While I was reading and researching about you, I stumbled across this thing where you have mentioned that you work with some of the very giant enterprise clients out there, notable clients out there. So Meta was one, Alibaba was one, and many more. Could you share some one success story and what any numbers, any KPIs that were delivered for their objectives?
Yeah, makes sense. So I would say I've been very fortunate to work with those brands. There comes a time in your career you keep working, and there is this chance that takes you from level 1 to level 60 out of 100. And that was that level with Content Ally. So I'm incredibly grateful to the management for giving me an opportunity to work for that company. It's, depending on where you're listening, it should be almost 2 years now. There. Back to your question. When I joined, I think we first had Meta was one of the big clients. And then after I joined, a couple of all these other big brands came in. I think Alibaba too was also around before I joined. And the thing is, case studies. For these enterprise brands, they use podcasting, especially B2B podcasting, for a couple of things. I mentioned the other one, which is the retention one. They interview customers, but they also use the tool as a means to drive a goal that we call user adoption or customer adoption. So it's time to talk about the metaverse, put some things out there about development and let people use more of metaverse, whether as a B2B side or users actually using the metaverse. And that's just one example. We've seen clients, your customers use this as a recruitment tool. So they give a couple of series about why, it is good to work in so, and they interview employees and do that. So we've seen people who do that. There are some companies I've seen that do this out of regulation. For example, in all these industries that are heavily regulated, tobacco and stuff like that, and you may have all these companies that need to share what's going on in that industry and things like that. And we've seen some brands who are just interested in certain topics like engineering or AI, and they want to be the thought leader in that specific side, or even sustainability. You want to be a leader in that specific side. Podcasting is just part of that, what we call content hub. So the content hub, we have a couple of other things like blog posts, white papers, and all that, and then podcasts. So we often like the idea of content hubs because if you probably know these folks like Chris Walker and Joe Polizzi often talk about building a media company or building a brand department that is not just producing content, but building a community through the content that they produce. That's what you're doing at your end as well. So they do that and they use podcasts as a means to impact some of those objectives. Now, some people might say, oh, these are not driving straight to revenue. But the thing is that consumer journeys have changed these days. Like I said before, people smell a rat from far away. So if you give them ads from the start without building a relationship, they're going to go away. So podcasting is used to influence some of these other softer KPIs so that people can be better connected and they can build their market share as they would.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And because it's a versatile medium altogether, but how do you tailor your strategies and basically align it with the unique goals of your clients and content arise? What your process looks like?
That's a very good question. So I will make it very simple because of time. But the first thing is that you need to understand what I have said before in terms of how people are able to apply podcasts at different stages of the funnel, right? If you do it well, I think you can even apply it at every stage of the funnel. Okay, but from a production or strategy perspective, I would say, let's say it's split into 5 parts. The first part is strategy. So what is the purpose of the podcast? Why are we doing this podcast? You don't do the podcast because somebody else is doing it or a competition is doing it. Oh, let's get there before them. No, let's do it because there is some sort of what I call a commercial purpose behind it. It's supposed to serve as more education, to do as more demand generation, as a better ABM to educate those who are not yet customers about your product and so on. So what are then I like that. Once that is done, then we can start production, which contains a lot of the guest scheduling, and you schedule your guests. There's a million steps involved. Podcasting is very difficult. There's a million steps involved in getting a guest that will say yes, and then you start to produce what is the kind of technology you want to produce with, what is the kind of podcast hosting platform that you use. We use Co-host and Casted, but there are a couple of other good ones. To be honest, we work with any platform, but those are our favorite. And once that interview is done for the clients, and then you've got a bunch of interviews, then you can launch your podcast. So the reason why a launch is important is because it's like a show. And when you're launching, you should launch with a couple of episodes, right? So once that launch happens, then some people might say, okay, that's it. The podcast will do its job. No. You need to produce content and you also need to push that content out. you have to repurpose your podcast into different formats. A lot of formats nowadays, audio, visual, even image, quotes, if you want, as well. And then you need to promote those things that you did. So, do you want to use organic promotion like podcast SEO? Podcast SEO is a very new thing coming in now, and everything is still very rudimentary, but it works if you're able to do decent keyword research, optimize your titles and descriptions and things like that.
Yeah.
And then you can take it ahead to say, this podcast, I need to get more downloads. I need to reach the people I want it to reach.
Yeah.
So you can then promote those podcasts and use them to get and use them to get downloads. So this is different from the kind of podcast ads people see nowadays where they say, oh, this is that. Sign up here. And that runs in somebody else's podcast. No. This is definitely running ads through different other channels that you might be familiar with, and finding a way to attribute a download to that channel through the ads.
Yeah.
So not until you complete this, of course, there is the KPI and optimization process and always measuring stuff. But I would say at the high level, this is how it should be. If you're starting out as a podcaster, you don't have to make everything complex. As long as you touch every step one way or the other, I think you are on to something. And for as a personal tip, record more episodes than you would love to. The reason is that this podcasting is not easy, and you get to a stage where you start to get tired. For example, at Dot Loves Marketing, we've recorded over 120 episodes, but now I'm getting tired. Like I know I'm not even in the mood to make podcast episodes anymore. We already had all that 100 in the backlog coming out, and I can rest through that. So that's something that has helped me personally. So yeah, that would be my high level overview.
What are the main KPIs that you keep track of to measure the success? Let's do episode level traction. Let's talk on that front.
I'm not a fan of too many KPIs, so I'll give you about 3 or 4. The first one really being the first one really being the downloads themselves, right? A download as defined by Interactive Advertising Bureau is a 30-second buffer of the episode, buffer or download of the episode. A 60-second, 60-second buffer of the episode. And so, of course, we want to get as many people to download as possible that are also relevant. And there are other download related KPIs. For example, you also want to track listeners. So those people listening, all these are available in the hosting. But what we do sometimes is that we want to track how many episodes or how many times people listening to the episode. For example, is a user listening more than once?
Yeah.
Are they downloading more than once? That way it shows that people are loyal to the show and they are not like, as we call it, one episode stand.
Yeah.
If we put it that way. One important KPI is consumption rate. It's just like how people are obsessed with that KPI on YouTube.
Yeah.
Consumption rate is very important. And one of the keys to having a good consumption rate is looking at your episode runtime. You might get loyal followers that listen to 1 hour episodes without issues, but you might also have people who just want to listen to something for 15 minutes or listen to it for 20 minutes, which is like the average time it takes to drive to work or something like that.
Yeah.
Or the average time to commute. Consumption rates must be as high as it can be. There are no benchmarks per se, as high as close as it can be to 100%, basically. But yeah, that would be a couple of other KPIs like SEO. So companies nowadays are starting to rank podcasts based on keywords. This is all of work like SEMrush or Ahrefs, but for podcast platforms, not Google search or Bing search. So that is coming up. Some people are trying to do that, and it's working partially. It's not working entirely, but I would say at the basic level, those other KPIs should be your start.
Gotcha. And because with Lesson now, you are helping these companies grow their audience as well. And basically through the paid ads front. Would love to see your approach on that and what that typical process looks like.
Yeah, first of all, I'm very fortunate to be part of the team that worked on this. So it's beyond ads agency. Anybody's an ad expert these days. You can these platforms have made it very easy. But the problem with podcasting is that it's grown so fast in the last 2 years that
Yeah.
there's not enough standards in place in terms of what a download is, how to even track a download and things like that. So we've been very instrumental in building the ad tech that deals with attribution. eMarketer recently released a report on it, and they said this continues to be a problem on how to track what a download is from an ad. And people are trying different things. There are different tools. Chartable tried it for B2B, they backed out. Attribution is probably the biggest problem in podcasting. And we're happy to say that we've been able to crack that from a not just a download standpoint, but if I get this right from the tech team, the click to play and also 1 minute listens are also some of the ad tech. So it's like they build like an app, right? And that app is supposed to advise any ad publisher that this is a download. So on the other side is the ad strategy. How you run ads for podcasts is different from text ads or video ads or anything like that. You should be able to run ads, for example, in a way that it shows on the new YouTube podcast platform or even on YouTube Music, or even tag some level of targeting that is the kind of keywords you use, not necessarily sales keywords because it's a knowledge thing. There are many others. The strategy is very different and the ad tech is very different. So we combine these two together and try to help brands, not just B2B and B2C, that want to use all these ad networks that use low drive downloads. And a bit of it sometimes also grows the audience in terms of subscribers, although I've noticed that 99% of people don't want to subscribe. Only 1% do. And that's still a prevailing issue in this part of in this industry right now. It also helps in a way as well. So just say in your head, there's the ad tech side that deals with the attribution, and there's the ad strategy side that, let me give you a very good example. If you talk to any YouTube person now, they will tell you they run in-stream ads. Now, what if I told you that in-stream ads are not great for podcast promotion on YouTube? Outstream ads are the ones that are great. So that is the strategy of outstream, which I don't have the chance to explain much here because of time, is what works for podcast promotion on YouTube and how you can make all the attribution and things like that. So I wouldn't say we've figured everything out, but to be at the forefront of setting the standards and testing things out and inventing stuff is really fun. I think that is with somebody like me who have come from a very high PPC background, both on DV360 and Google Ads side and all the other ads platforms out there. Yeah, it's very exciting to see podcasts and ads come together.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. And building and running podcast definitely involves a lot of tasks. I would love to know what typically the set of responsibilities that your content analyze team takes on their shoulder, and what all do you basically leverage your clients basic on, or is it something that you have in and out?
Like I said before, it's very complex.
Yeah.
I will say this and I'll say the reason why I said it. If you're a company, I would suggest you outsource your podcast if you can. And I'm not saying that because I work for Content Allies and I want to get your business, but because I also run my own podcast.
Yeah.
And if not that, Content Allies.
I think for your own personal podcast, also you take care of content analysis, right?
Yeah. So it's not they don't do everything. They do about 70 or 80% of it. I do all the repurposing, the recording, but a lot of heavy post-production. There's a lot of QA. So there's a QA team on the side. Everything has to match, everything has to be perfect. The schedule has to work. They have to go through. There's a lot of automation that they use, like AI and stuff.
Oh,
Even with the AI, like you still have to, a human has to check stuff as well. You have to extract the clips, you have to transcribe,
Yeah.
The guest scheduling is to get a guest, you have to first do your research, like you are a salesperson. Then you have to do outreach, you have to do the follow-up, you have to prepare materials to show that you're actually running a podcast and this is not like a fluke or something.
Yeah.
It's a million steps. It's a million. We have from a mixture of full contractors, maybe 70 people or 60 people working on different accounts at the same time and making sure everything works. Sometimes, like in our case, before we met, I canceled before, right? It was supposed to be a week before, but I canceled.
Yeah.
So a team has to deal with all that cancellation and they have to go and update their CRM. There's just so much that goes on. So instead of just boring you with the details, I
Yeah.
would say just find a company, an agency that does this, but that does it with strategic intent. It's not just somebody that is they want to get it done and move on. They are doing this with a strategic intent, and they're
Yeah.
going to report on their work too.
And then, Dodge, you mentioned using AI. Can you tell me a few major tasks where you actually leverage AI?
Yeah, we use a tool. One of the tools we use is Descript. So Descript is a very robust tool for podcasting where you're able to transcribe, you're able to repurpose. In fact, one of the things I hear they said it does is that maybe while recording, the audio went bad, the AI is able to fill in that void with the person's voice. If you can just type in some text in there. So maybe somebody wants to change something they said. If you just type in the text, it changes what they said, but in their own voice. So they they use AI for a lot of those things. I must admit I am not part of that team, but there are a lot of other things that they use to do the AI, like even developing show notes, social posts, just extracting content from the podcast to do that. AI in conjunction with ChatGPT and things like that. AI has come to stay and it works very well in podcasting.
Yeah. I even stumbled across one of the AI tool that will ensure that you're making a proper eye contact on your Zoom calls, even though you're like moving your head, shaking your head, whatever. And
Yeah, it's if you really look back, what's happened this year, 2023, is huge. I must tell you, it's huge. So I only pity the writers, but that's another subject for another day.
now, coming to my very last question. Could you share any memorable or unexpected moment from your journey in podcast marketing altogether that really shaped your approach or your perspective in this niche?
Honestly, I think it's when I founded Listen Network with my other senior co-founders, and emphasis on senior. We have a couple of agencies who have tried to do this at a global level, but not at the level of detail that we are doing it. And we are doing it in a way whereby we try to utilize major platforms, whether it's the display network or LinkedIn, and be able to track that attribution. Again, back to the attribution. Trying to solve the attribution problem took us 6 months before we were able to even figure it out and be able to apply it. So podcast marketing itself is new. I'm fortunate to be able to know a lot about podcast SEO. Other aspect of podcasting are not very hard. Like you put a podcast in a newsletter, you send it out. Anybody can do that. Podcast SEO is very technical. Podcast ads are even more technical because there's even a tech involved. It's not just about the ad strategy. It's for me, or maybe for almost my entire career. Like sometimes you tend to work, and I'm saying this with all grace. Sometimes you tend to work as a marketer or as anything in a place whereby you are using tools, you are developing, you are working with solutions already existing. But when it comes to a place whereby you are the one inventing something that changes the industry, then that's huge. That is really huge. You create your own stuff that the industry either buy or copy. That's a legacy that I would like to be remembered for the rest of my life. I'm incredibly grateful for the opportunity to participate, and the work goes on. If you are listening, feel free to check listennetwork.co.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dogs, for all the time, all the information, all the wisdom that you shared in this session. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no worries. No worries. Thank you. Thank you for having me again.